Hello everyone and welcome. In this video I'm going to talk about arrays in C++. So an array is a data structure that allows you to store multiple values all in the same place. Now the first thing you need to do in order to create an array is you have to specify which data type the values of the array are going to be. And every value in the array is going to be of the same data type. So if you create an array of data type int, then all of the values in the array are going to be integers, okay? So I'm going to create an array called A, an array of integers. Now, in order for this to be an array, I have to put these braces in front of the name, and I have to specify the length of the array. I have to specify the size of the array. And once I do that, I cannot change the size of the array, okay? That is a fixed number. It's never going to change. You don't have the power to do so. So if I say A has the length of 4, then A forever is going to have the length of 4, and you cannot change that, okay? So I'm going to say equal, and then in order to define the values that are inside of the array, I'm going to write curly braces, and then I'm going to write 4 integers, right, because that's the size of the array, so it has 4 elements. I'm going to write 4 integers inside of the curly braces separated by commas, like so. So what I've done here is I've created an array of integers called A with the length of 4 and with the elements 1, 2, 3, and 4. So now how do you access these elements? Now, if you just see out A like this, let me run this to show you what it looks like. So as you can see, this is only going to see out kind of these random numbers and letters. So this is actually the memory location of the array. So when you see out the array, you're not going to see out every individual element, but rather the memory location of that array. So how are you going to see out the elements? So instead of saying see out A, you're going to say cout a curly, sorry, not curly braces, just these braces, these are like square brackets. And you're going to put the position of the element which you want to see out. So inside of the array, there are positions that are ordered, and each element has its position in the array. The positions are called indexes, and they start at 0 and go to the length of the array minus 1. So in this case, 1 is going to be at the index 0, 2 is going to be at the index 1, 3 is going to be at the index 2, and 4 is going to be at the index 3. So as you can see, they go from 0 to 4 minus 1. So in order to access the first element of this array, I'm going to access the index 0. And that's how you do it. You say the name of the array, and then these square brackets, and then you put the index that you want to access. And so if I run this, this is going to output 1, which is the element that's stored at the first index of the array, which is index 0. Then if I say index 3, then this is going to see out the last element of the array. Now, if I put an index that doesn't exist, so for example, a negative number or like 13 is an index that doesn't exist because the length of this array is 4, and so the indexes only go from 0 to 3. So 13 is an index that doesn't exist. If I just run this like this is just going to output a random value. If I put like 10, index 10, this is also going to output a random value. If I put like 8, then this is also going to output a random value. Why does this happen? So when you create an array, a certain piece of memory is allocated in order to store the elements of that array. When you try to access an index of the array that doesn't exist, the program is going to try to access a certain piece of memory, a certain memory location that doesn't have anything related to the array stored in it. It just has a random value stored in it because you haven't stored something in that piece of memory. And so when you try to see out an index of the array that doesn't exist, then the program is just going to print the random number that's stored in that memory location to the console. So that's why when you try to access indexes that don't exist, you're going to have some weird random value as an output. Now, in some cases, you might not want to initialize your array, meaning you want to create the array, but you don't want to give it values. Now, in order to do that, that is perfectly fine, by the way. In order to do that, you just have to create the array, and you have to give it a size, okay? If you want to give values to the array right away, as you're creating it, instead of just initializing it, you don't really have to put the value here. So let me show you that this is going to be perfectly fine. This is not going to see out anything, but it's also not going to give an error. So as you can see, this works perfectly fine. Now, the reason this happens is that the program can assess the length of the array just from looking at its elements. So when you just create an array like this, then the program is intelligent enough to be able to realize that this array is of length 4, okay? Now, you can also initialize all of the elements of your array to 0, okay? Now, the way you can do this is you have to specify the size of the array. So, for example, 3. Now, instead of putting like 0, 0, 0, which is what you'd probably do, if you just put empty curly braces like this, then this is just going to initialize all of the elements of the array to 0. So, let me prove it to you by cout a0, then a1, and a2. So let me run this. As you can see, all of the elements are going to be 0. Now you can also ask the user to input the values of the array. So I'm going to create an uninitialized array called A, and then it's going to have a size of 2, for example, and then I want to see in a index 0, so I want to see in the first element, and a index 1, which is going to be the second element, and then I want to see out a 0 and then a 1, like so. So let me run this, and it's going to ask me to input 2 values. I'm going to input 1 and 2, and then it's going to see out 1 and 2 like this. So this is how you can store values that are inputted from the user in the array. Now you can also modify certain indexes in the array. So it can ask the user to input certain values for the array, and then I can say a0 equals 10, for example, and then when I see out a0 and a1, this is going to see out, oh wait, let me just put the values. Okay, this is going to see out 10 and then 2. Now imagine that you want to get the size of an array. So how can you do that? So there's this function in C++ called Sizeof. But this function is kind of weird because it doesn't really give you the size of the array. It gives you the size of the array in bytes and not in number of elements. So if I say size of A and I see out size of A, and I run this, as you can see, this is going to give me a weird number, so a number that I wasn't expecting, which is 8. Now, 8 is not the number of elements in the array. 8 is the number of bytes that each array takes up in memory. And a byte is just like a string of bits. So a bit is like a 0 or a 1, so binary numbers. So how can you get the number of elements in an array? So you have to divide the size of the array in bytes by the size of each element in bytes, and every element takes up the same number of bytes. So I can just divide the size of A by the size of A0, for example. And if I see out this is going to give me 2, which is the number that I would be expecting since this array has 2 elements in it. And it's completely equivalent when I say a index 1, since both elements are going to be the same, are going to take up the same number of bytes in memory. When I divide the size of the array by the size of any of the elements in bytes, they're always going to give me the same value. So I actually realized that I only showed you arrays that had integers in them, but you can also create arrays with any data type that you want. So if I create an array with characters, for example, letters has size of 2, its elements are, for example, A and B, for example. This is also valid. You can also create arrays with booleans. So for example, value, and let's say, for example, true and false. And an interesting about arrays with Boolean values is that instead of true or false, you can put zeros or ones. So you can put like 1 and 0. And let me change this to 4. And now let me see out value 0, value 1. Since you don't know for loops yet, you really have to do this this way, like to see out every value in the array. You have to access each index but I promise that when you learn for loops, it's going to become much easier. So if I run this, as you can see, everything works correctly. It's going to give me 1 for true, 0 for false. And that is basically all I had to show you today, I think. Nothing more comes to mind that is of use. If you found this video helpful, please like to support the channel. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any doubts, any questions, don't hesitate to ask as always, and I'll see you in the next video.